to testify, but they will not agree to testify publicly just yet. The Senate Judiciary Committee announcing moments ago that both men agreed to interview the committee prior to any public hearing. Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa vowed to subpoena them if they did not respond by today if they would testify Wednesday. CNN's Phil Mattingly is out front from Capitol Hill. Phil, thanks for joining us. Clearly, this doesn't seem to be what Chairman Grassley was hoping for. He seemed to want Manafort and Donald Trump Jr. to testify next week publicly.
Yeah, no question about it. But according to sources, this was kind of a case of something is better than nothing. They believe the threat of the subpoena, the threat of the public hearing, was enough to kind of bring Paul Manafort, Donald Trump Jr., and their lawyers to the table. Now there's a negotiation. They have said they will negotiate to provide documents. They will negotiate to have a closed-door interview. And Chuck Grassley took to Twitter, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and said there will at some point be an open hearing. Now, the schedule for the interviews, the documents, and the public hearing that supposedly is in the works, that has not been set yet, but they do feel like they have some leverage, they use some leverage, and now those two individuals will at least sit down with committee members. It is worth noting, Jake, one subpoena was issued today to Glenn Simpson, the head of the firm Fusion GPS, which is behind the Russian dossier. He has already stated through his lawyers that he would not testify next week. He would invoke his Fifth Amendment privileges if he was compelled to testify. The committee has sent a subpoena to him, but at least for now, not to Donald Trump Jr. or Paul Manafort, though both Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Grassley said they reserve the right to issue a subpoena if they don't get the answers they're looking for in the future, Jake.
All right, and Phil, we're also hearing tonight that the House Intelligence Committee will interview Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, early next week. I assume that's going to be in private?
Yeah, that will also be closed door, and that will actually follow the Senate Intelligence Committee that's supposed to sit down on a staff level with Jared Kushner on Monday behind closed doors. House Intelligence Committee will do the same thing on Tuesday. Look, we know that there's a multitude of investigations, both on the federal side of things and on Capitol Hill. The House Intelligence Committee and Senate Intelligence Committee very clearly ramping up. That hasn't been a secret over the last couple of weeks, and now we're seeing a lot of key players start to come in. Jared Kushner will be the latest. Monday at Senate Intel, Tuesday with House Intelligence, Jake.
All right, Phil Mattingly for us on Capitol Hill. Thanks so much, Phil. Out front tonight, Republican Congressman Will Hurd, Republican of Texas. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee, and he is also a former CIA agent. Congressman, good to see you. As always, what do you want to ask Jared Kushner next week?
Well, I'm always reticent with talking about who's coming in and when they're coming in. Sometimes scheduling issues happen, but ultimately, when were contacts made, what was discussed, basic conversations around engagement with Russian officials, I think is important, and getting a laundry list of the topics of those conversations, I think is the first step.
I also want to get your reaction to this other breaking story this evening. The Washington Post is reporting that according to current and former U.S. officials, Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, who you know is considered by U.S. intelligence to not only be a diplomat but also be a spy and spy recruiter himself, that Kislyak, in intercepts that were picked up by U.S. intelligence, said that he discussed with then-Senator, now Attorney General Jeff Sessions, substantive campaign-related matters during the 2016 presidential race. I guess one of the big questions, Congressman, is how credible is it that Sergei Kislyak would say something like that, thinking that he was saying it privately, and that he wasn't telling the truth? Because this could come down to Attorney General Sessions saying, well, Sergei Kislyak's lying, and Kislyak wouldn't say anything. Is it credible that maybe Kislyak was just boasting, but it wasn't really based on anything?
Well, let me answer those questions and unpack that statement by putting on my former CIA hat.
Please.
And look, I was calling for Kislyak to be kicked out of the country back last summer. I think, and it's clear that the Russians attempted to try to influence our elections, and the Russians are our adversaries, not our allies. But we have unnamed sources talking about confidential, classified information. One, why are we talking about classified information? Two, this is claiming that he said something. Do we know the details of what was actually said in this conversation? So there's a whole lot of questions about the report in and of itself before we can start drawing conclusions. Yes, there's a possibility that this was a exaggeration of information. If Ambassador Ambassador Kislyak believes that he is being listened to by the U.S. government. You know, this is a denial and deception opportunity. One of the things that we do know that the Russians are trying to erode trust in our democratic institutions, and so they're some of the best in the world at using disinformation campaigns. So we have to be careful in drawing too many conclusions based on a report from unnamed sources. But I will say this: there's nobody better than Robert Mueller in getting to the crux of a matter. And you got to know that he and his team are working hard to unpack all this. They're researching everything, and they're going to make sure that no stone they're going to make sure every stone is turned over when it comes to this investigation.
Former CIA Director John Brennan slammed Donald Trump Jr. For taking that meeting with the Russian lawyer, that 2016 meeting, including Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner. I want to play for you some of what former CIA Director Brennan had to say.
It was just profoundly baffling why three of the senior-most members of a presidential campaign would jump at the opportunity to meet with individuals that were going to, according to what's been in the reports, provide information, information on Hillary Clinton that was coming from the Russian government. The Russians operate in a very, very cunning manner, and they will take and exploit any opportunity they get, and it seems as though some folks swallow the bait.
You've told me before that you would never take a meeting like that you would call the FBI. What do you think of former CIA Director Brennan referring to the decision to take the meeting as profoundly baffling?
Well, again, it's hard for me to separate my previous experience and knowledge of Russian activity. It's hard to separate that, and it's hard for me to believe that anybody would take this kind of meeting. The Russians are notorious of trying to put people in compromising positions. They use that to extort people. This is one of their hallmarks of their tradecraft, and so I had 9.5 years of experience going toe-to-toe with Russian intelligence, and to me it's pretty clear. Stay far away.
Congressman Will Hurd, thank you for your service with the CIA, and thanks for joining us this evening.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, good to see you, Will. And now to more breaking news, new details on Jared Kushner's wealth. President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor just submitted revised financial disclosures detailing not only his extensive holdings, but multiple changes, including omissions of some of his most valuable holdings. Christina Leshy is out front for us. Christina, what have you found in these documents?
Yeah, these documents have just been released, so we're still going through them, but they're important because it's a way to hold Kushner accountable for possible conflicts of interest between his substantial financial assets and his position as one of the closest advisors to the president. Now, in this latest revision, Kushner added, as you noted, more than 70 holdings he says were inadvertently omitted from the previous form he filed. Now, some of these assets he already divested, but two of the omissions stood out to me because they happen to be among his most valuable assets. First, a tech company called Cadre, which is an elite crowdfunding platform. On the original form, we actually didn't see the name of the entity, just the holding company. And that's a problem because you can't assess conflicts without knowing the name of the asset. And in the new form, you see the company listed, and it has an interesting endnote. It's actually a recusal. It says Kushner can't participate in particular matters that would impact Cadre. Now, Kushner heads, as you know, the technology initiatives for the White House, so the recusal could limit some of what he does there. Now, a second holding I want to highlight is a glimpse into his wealthy lifestyle. He has a big art collection that's worth anywhere between $5 and $25 million. The form also shows Kushner once held Israeli bonds, but divested from them, and the bonds could have led to a conflict because of the role the president has given him to broker a peace deal in the Middle East. Look, it's important to note at this point that the document is now certified, which means the Office of Government Ethics has reviewed it and is now vouching that Kushner is appropriately managing potential conflicts, Jake.
And to top it off, these forms came a day after a rather vocal administration critic left the Office of Government Ethics.
Yeah, that's an understatement. Walter Shaub, the former director of government ethics, as you pointed out, left his position without signing off on Kushner's financial disclosure forms. Shaub repeatedly criticized the White House for how it handled ethical issues, and his signature, Jake, would have provided added credibility to the document. But on his last day on the job, Shaub told me that his stamp of approval, even if he had given it, would not be a permanent blessing for anybody. Listen.
In the end, our regulation says we're certifying that on its face, there are no obvious conflicts of interest. That's not a free pass going forward.
It's not a clean bill of health.
That's right. It's not a clean bill of health. It's simply saying we have not detected any in our review of this report. It's a snapshot in time, not only of the report, but in terms of our analysis.
Now, for Kushner, the process of getting this form certified was not an easy one. There was a lot of back and forth between the agency and Kushner's lawyers. Kushner's lawyers say all the back and forth is completely normal given the complexity here, but clearly Kushner not taking the advice of several ethics experts who wanted to see Jared and Ivanka shed their assets completely, which we've now estimated tonight, based off of these forms, to be worth anywhere between $139 million and $626 million. Tonight, we're also seeing more about Ivanka's holdings. She has to file similar paperwork, which is still under review at the OGE, but you'll see a lot of similar holdings as her husband in her form. She does list a few fun things, lists residuals from The Apprentice, SNL, and Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. Jake, I'll be going through the document in much more detail because there's a lot to be mined here.
All right, Christina Alessi, thanks so much. Joining me now to discuss this, Stephen Moore, CNN senior economics analyst. He also served as a senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign. And Richard Painter, who served as an ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration. Richard, let me start with you. You just heard Christina report that Kushner added more than 70 holdings to his disclosure forms. Do you think that that is going to be the complete picture, or is there going to be more likely that comes out?
Well, I have no idea. I think he's getting good legal advice on his financial disclosure form, and hopefully he's disclosing everything. It's troubling when he keeps changing his forms, at least on the security side, with respect to his meetings with the Russians. So I don't know what's going on here. But I assume that it's all there and that it's true. The problem is that with his form, as well as with President Trump's form, we do not get information about what's going on at the corporate level in these entities that they own and control. The corporate entity listed on the form can go and borrow money from the Chinese, from the Russians, or anywhere around the world, or have joint ventures around the world, and you're not going to get that information on the form. And most of the activity in these business empires, both Trump and Kushner, is going on at the corporate level. So yes, we know he's in the real estate business, but we don't know where he's borrowing his money. We don't know who the various other joint venture partners are because they don't have a contractual relationship directly with him, and that's what goes on the form. Companies that he either owns stock in or that he has a contractual relationship with. So the disclosure is nowhere near enough to find out where the economic dependency relationships are, particularly with entities or possibly governments outside the United States. And that's my biggest concern, and it applies, of course, to the president as well.
Stephen, one of the issues when you're dealing with individuals like the president or Jared Kushner, who have such vast amounts of wealth, is whether or not they can ever really be completely free of conflicts. I remember Penny Pritzker, who ended up being President Obama's Secretary of Commerce in the second term. It took her literally years to untangle all the things that might have been a conflict of interest, and cost her quite a bit of money, as I understand it, as well. When you have such wealth, can you ever be completely free of conflicts?
It's the great question to ask, Jake. And, you know, I probably know 20 people, highly talented, extremely successful in the financial or business sector, who basically said no when they were asked to take a position in the Trump administration for precisely this reason, that they didn't want to go through literally months of divulging all of their financial assets and literally thousands of pages of financial disclosure. And we really need to ask ourselves, do we want want people of wealth to be in public service. Now, I would make the case to you, Jake, that the American people knew that Donald Trump was a real estate man. You asked a really interesting question earlier when you played the devil's advocate about, do we want a special prosecutor going through every financial transaction that Donald Trump has engaged in the last 10 or 15 years? This could be the kind of thing that could cripple and paralyze his presidency at a time when we have to deal with health care reform and tax reform. We're not talking about that tonight. We're talking about, Russia and these financial disclosure issues. So I would say that this is a big problem, because if it goes forward and Trump has to disclose all these financial statements, he is going to be paralyzed, because you all in the media are going to obsess over this night after night after night.
That's all the time we have. Stephen Moore, Richard Painter, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. AC 360 starts right now.